want to see what you guys are interested in studying. So we're going to do just open-ended MuleSoft Q&A today. So welcome. And what do you guys want to ask about? We can use the chat. You can unmute, introduce yourselves. Why don't we go around and do a couple of introductions? I know I've met a couple of you before. And we could do that. And Whitney, we can do the proper slide introduction whenever you want. I don't have slides, but I think you sent me some, didn't you? But otherwise, I'd love to meet you guys. I'd love to know who's here.
It's a
few
slides, so I want to apologize. So it was supposed to originally be hyper automation, but everything got updated to be advanced Mule development. And so I was kind of thinking everyone can ask advanced Mule questions and get their answers, get answers for it. So it's a few slides. I mean, I can do them, but they're really just fluffer slides. So I think we can just start.
Yeah. And if not, I can ask you guys some advanced Mule questions and see how we do. That's
I've got a question for you then. It's Francis Edwards, MuleSoft Ambassador. How you doing? I can tell you what I've been up to and what I'm preparing for. This week I've got a Maven archetype done. I was quite pleased with myself. I wonder if people are familiar with Maven archetypes and getting a setup project done. I can't believe it's taken this long for me to get around to it. I've been setting up in GitHub new projects. I've been importing the certificates, setting up default config files. I've been putting in like import plugins. I was thinking, there must be an easier way of doing this. So yeah, Maven archetypes, or exporting the project or a skeleton project as a template and publishing it to Exchange. There seems to be two ways of doing it. At the command line, build your Maven archetype and then install it in your local Maven repository. That's okay if you're a one-off like individual developer, but if you're going to share it amongst other developers, there's in Studio itself, just go into File, go down to the Anypoint Platform menu and do Publish Template. So yeah, I published my first template, so the rest of my 6 team can start using that to initialize their projects. But it's kind of handy because I might be off to my French office to go and show some other people how to use MuleSoft and how to quick start.
I was going to ask about, I think it would be good for people to know the difference between an archetype and a template.
Yeah, that's the thing. They both look the same to me, to be honest. If you if you're in Studio, when you're debugging a project, you'll notice it just runs the Maven command. So it's a Maven build and deploy into your local embedded. When you publish things to Exchange, again, it's another Maven sort of deploy command, this time to the Exchange repository. But if you publish a template, it's just a certain type of file. It means that it can be used from Exchange to import a new template. So if people are familiar with adding a connector, for example, from Anypoint Exchange into their Studio, same sort of thing. You just go File, New, and instead of New Project, which does the default scaffold, you can say New Project from Template. It'll open up Exchange. And if you've got any templates saved in your group, you can choose those. And that's what I did. Set up my own template with my own JKS files with its own encrypted passwords, all that sort of thing, and a skeleton project, which included the secure property placeholder in the POM file, the injected dependencies, like my global error handler and my status check. But there's loads of other templates as well. If you look at them provided by MuleSoft, you'll get things like SAP templates. I would say that these are the brilliant templates for projects. The POM files and the dependencies aren't usually worked out, but it gives you an idea of skeleton flows. If you're stumped about how shall I set these flows up to do a bidirectional update, for example, it's a useful thing to go and have a look at. It's not something that's taught in the training courses, is it?
No, I think in production-ready development practices, they use advanced Maven, but the templates and archetypes are not, the templates and examples are not actually archetypes. So it's
that's
like, right. They're more specific to MuleSoft. Archetype is more general to Java, right? And and they're more built into all the tooling and enablement, like you're saying, for your team. So I like what Francis is offering you guys. There's a very he's got ideas about how to set up your secure properties and how to organize your config files and how to do your certificates, right? And each shop is going to have their own way of doing that, right? So having a template gives you a way to just say, here you go, it's done, right?
And not just one template, you might want a number of templates. I can imagine having 4 templates: a system layer, process layer, an experience layer, and then an async event type handler process layer. Those are the 4 templates that I'm going to try and use. The system one may have, for example, back-end connection ability or a few properties that are unique to the sorts of things that are expected to be saved as the operations, so passwords and all that sort of thing for connectors, back-end connectors. But experience layer, I suppose the sort of properties may be different because you're going to be applying policies and you're going to be looking at user accounts. And then process layers, you're looking at polling times and stuff like that. So I can see how these different archetypes will diverge from each other.
Yeah, that's good. And they you might have a different one for Cloud Hub or for RTF or for standalone, right? If you're going to have different, depending on how many Mule apps you make all the time, right?
That's right. But it saved me a lot of time because initially I was just setting up a default Mule project and then literally copying from other projects my log4j file, my properties, my certificates, my standard data weaves, and my globals config and my POM files. So by having those in a template, that just allows me to start up projects a lot quicker and save to Git and then start iterating forward.
Yeah, we did one on Diane did one actually. She would love to talk about it if she wasn't teaching class right now. For one of my clients, we created a template, and we found that when you start with a template, there's kind of like, we can put a lot into the template, but then there's certain things you got to change when you use the template every time, like the artifact ID and the name of the file in the log4j2. Like there's all these little changes. So what we tried to do, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to do one from scratch here. That sounds like a good
as well to encrypt the right runtime, the standard runtime properties. One of the reasons I think one of the main benefits that I saw was that you create a template or you create a default or a skeleton project, and then the first thing you want to do is save it into Git. And the first mistake people make is have unencrypted passwords. So by having a template which has encrypted passwords for the JKS and for the things that are part of the default setup, as soon as you save it to GitHub, you're not accidentally saving some clear text passwords.
Yeah, and getting the secure property set up is one of those annoying things that you have to do every time, right? So if we made a new template project, so let's make one together. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Sound fun? So what's nice, so if you make a new Maven archetype, this is not what you do. So one big difference between Maven archetypes and Mule templates is that it's a lot easier to make Mule templates, and it's a lot harder to make Maven archetypes, but they are more powerful in different ways. So we're just going to make a Mule project first, and we're going to call it a template. Let me get all this stuff. So what happens when I share my screen? I'm going to get my screen all organized here. There we go. So I can speed my computer up. So when you make a template or an example, actually, Francis, did you do any examples? Do you want to?
I start off doing example projects, and then save it as a template.
And also make example projects, right?
I haven't actually made any example projects yet. I've just stuck to do templates at the moment.
Is this better?
Yeah, you are stuttering for me, but maybe that's my broadband. I'm just closing a few things.
I think it was me. Well, I may not be able to share my screen. Somebody want to do one? Want to make a template? Who has a better internet connection? When I started sharing, it got real stuttery, didn't it?
Yeah, I I can do a sharing if you want me to share.
Yeah, just go make one. Because I don't want people to think it's this big hard thing to do, right? You can just go make one. Like quick. Do I have to give you permission?
Not unless it's sharing right now.
Oh, it looks good.
So there you go. I am showing you my production workspace.
Ooh.
But I'm not showing you anything that you can't see. Like, so yeah, I will when I produce a template project, I create just a default project, and by default, have a look at what this default project's got in. The sort of things that you want as default would be globals, for example. I'll start with POM file. So with a POM file, I use a parent POM. I've created a parent POM, so I want to inject this parent POM. It's got my dependency management, and it's also got my configuration details for deploying to Cloud Hub. So, instantly secured some stuff away. So every new project that I want my developers to do, they would need to have a parent POM injection. Then they'd have the normal properties and some default properties, and this is what I expect in all projects. So I want to see an implementation version as well as an API version. Then, as we know, we make implementations from APIs. So this is the plugin for grabbing the RAML version of the API. So that'll get changed to whatever the RAML spec is. And then I've got the munit and the build plugin just to show how it's built. The standard dependencies that I'm going to pick up, things like HTTP connector, because pretty much all your APIs are going to have a HTTP connector and an API kit. And then we've touched on needing the secure property connector, so you don't forget that. And I've got one dependency that's common amongst all my projects, just to give it a live endpoint. The plugin repository is required just to pull in the build plugins, but everything else is in the parent plugin that I've got. So that's the main thing I wanted to show you here was the standard dependencies that I have. So those 4 dependencies there feed into the globals. So in my globals, I've got a number of namespaces. So I've got the secure property namespace. There you go. I've got things like the TLS for the import certificates. So these global properties that I've set up are going to be pretty standard in all projects. Notice how I don't have an implementation, because what I'm going to do is the first thing when I build a project from here is uncomment the part with the API, go find the Exchange asset I want to do, pull that, and then scaffold from the API that's pulled into the project. So the other things that tend to be standard, we touched on them. We said properties. So I've got a few YAML files that are set up. I've got the first 2 properties that I'd require for any typical implementation. Those properties are required by the HTTP listener. Then I'll have some test configuration data, and notice how it's already pre-encrypted. But these pre-encrypted values here are for the other thing that's imported here, the key store. So these encrypted values will open and unlock this key store, and that's what's used in the global settings for TLS. And then finally, I've got a log4j. And the log4j is standard across all projects. I've got some properties set up, so it looks for the project artifact. It then builds a log folder based on that app name. And then I've got a normal appender set up for outputting. And all the loggers that are used within MuleSoft are all set to just a warned level. So any components I'm likely to drag in will all get logged correctly. So those are templated and not too much specific to projects that needs to be edited afterwards. But the way you create a template,
these are things, Francis, these are things you want every one of your projects to be the same about.
Yeah. When another developer creates a project and I do code review, I'm looking for exactly this. But now I don't have to look for it. I just have to look for exactly what I've given them. And if they change it back.
Some of the things you could add in here, if whatever your standards are, there are things about your CI/CD process, like any standard tests in Immunit or a Azure Pipelines or a Jenkins file or something.
This one I set up this week, but that's how I'm going to iterate it forward.
But the more you iterate it forward, the more it's going to be specialized to your team, right?
Exactly.
So that's now you want to show what I was hoping to show is you just built this in AnyPoint Studio. How does this get to the rest of the team?
the way that it gets to the rest of the team, there's two ways you can do it. You can either set up a Maven archetype, but then you have to distribute the Maven archetype, or you can create the template. And that's what I chose. I looked at both, I researched both methods and decided that exporting as a template was the best method. So by highlighting it, going to the platform, you can publish to Exchange, and the part that comes up, you can choose what sort of thing it is you're going to put. So I'm going to go to my local business group, and it's already picked up the fact that it's going to be a template. If I wanted to go to another business group, so my company is separated into quite a few different business groups, I could choose. It's already done. I'll go back and do that again and show you. If I was going to publish this to my colleagues in another business group, I could choose example or template from here. Because I've saved this already, it's picked up the fact that I've already got this project as an asset in Exchange. So as soon as I switched over to my business group, it pre-populated all these values with the previous values. So I'm going to go to my business group. It's picked up the values that are already there. It's already picked up that the previous version was 1.20 and given me the next version, 1.21. I'm going to stick with that. There's no changes, but I'm just demonstrating how it can then be sent up. But it gives you the ability to add tags and categories. So these are the Exchange type, publish Exchange type, or API catalog type categories.
Can you go slow here?
Yeah. But when you're in Exchange and you want to catalog your APIs or catalog your assets, you have the ability to add tags, you have the ability to add categories, and you have the ability to add custom fields. So in effect, this is just tagging your assets.
Extra stuff. So Maven doesn't know about those things. Those are Exchange, Anypoint Exchange special proprietary
exactly
metadata. So it's not gonna, Maven deploy won't do that, but the Exchange plugin for Maven can. Yeah,
that's right. That's what's running behind the scenes here. So I'm going to expand this just so that when I press finish, you can follow what comes up on the command line. When I press finish, it says, do you want to proceed? I'm going to say yes. And you can see it's running a Maven command. It's picking my local POM and it's doing a deploy, and it's telling me what Exchange I want to use. It's saying what sort of attached mule sources it wants to do. So it's like a customized Maven command that's publishing the asset.
That's pretty cool, because you can then make a repo and put this template code in there, and CI can do that part.
Right.
And that would allow your team to send pull requests for the template and stuff. So you can make the template also something that we work together on the team.
That's right. And then that creates your asset in the Exchange. I can show you Exchange, but I'm just going to show you how I would use that. If I wanted to now create a new project, I go into File, New, and rather than going to Mule Project, I go to Project from Template.
There you go. Yeah, cool, right?
I choose that project from template, and look, it logs into my Exchange. There's the template that I had. If I click that, it's going to create a new project based on this template. Before I do, I'll just show you that there are other templates. You can look in things like assets provided by MuleSoft. So if you wanted to see some example flows for bidirectional data between SAP and Salesforce, if you wanted to do, so there's a bidirectional data for Salesforce orgs and with account information. These are templates that MuleSoft have provided. My experience is that they tend to date from about 3 years ago.
They're super, super specific. A lot of, so that Azure storage one won't be as weird as what you just noticed. Most of them that have these funny prefixes like RCG and MFG, those come from the accelerators, and they're not going to be that useful unless you're using the accelerator.
Exactly.
But some of these are actually kind of handy, you know, if you wanted to try them out. For the ones that are more system API types, I think.
I've had a look at some of these, and the best way of describing them is that they have some implementation flows set up. So it just gives you an idea of what variables you need to capture, what sort of flows need to be set up for the different data types that can be expected from the systems. That they are quite generic, they are quite low level, but it gives you a starter. So
it doesn't have any of your stuff, like your certificates.
That's right.
So they're not going to be useful that way.
That's right. So if I choose the Studio Implementation Archetype, I can pick Open, and it's gonna build me a project. So here's my project. Obviously, it's named the archetype. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is to rename that. So I'll refactor it to something like a new project implementation. And that new project implementation, first thing I'm probably going to need to change is the POM file. The POM file, although it gives you the name changed when you did the refactoring, it didn't change the artifact ID. So I'll change the artifact ID, set that at 1.00. And then the next thing I'd need to do is to uncomment this bit, go find the exchange asset for the RAML that I want to pull into this project. Once I save that, it's going to pull into my resources in the API directory, a RAML, then I can build the scaffold from that. But you can see that it's already got things like the log4j that I showed you earlier. It's got things like the certificates, and it's got things like the default config files in the properties. So that is pretty much how you would build a template, promote it as an asset into Exchange, and then other developers, including yourself, could then reuse that.
I'm pretty impressed that when you started this, Francis, that you also considered a much more difficult way to do it using Maven archetypes, and that is necessary if you want to do like a custom policy or a Mule SDK connector project. So you might, I don't know if you want to share or if anybody's interested in what's different if you use the Maven archetype method.
The Maven archetype method, there is a video you can watch from Joyce Abal. She covered it all. I might just find that link for you.
Yeah, Maven archetype is a 10-year, 15-year-old thing that the open source community made for out of Maven, and it's not only for MuleSoft, so that's one difference, right? It's for everything in the Java world, but even that also means it won't be as nicely cooked into Anypoint Exchange and Anypoint Studio. So that's so you do have to do a lot more command line stuff, right?
That's right. So there's a YouTube video for building Maven archetypes in 10 steps from a while back, and copy. I'll share these in the chat. These two videos are what I watched. So this one is Joyce Bell's very quick. So if you want to learn about Maven archetypes and Maven projects templates, but that's building projects from the Maven archetypes, there's a quick 10-minute video you can watch from Mary Joyce Abel. If you want a bit more detail, that's got a bit more demo than this one. I'll share those two links in the chat. The commands themselves, you just need to do a Maven, create your archetype from your project. So you create a project, as I showed you with the create template, and you can run this at the command line. You need to have an archetype properties file, but that just injects a couple of properties into the Maven archetype that's created. The Maven archetype is created in a subdirectory of the target directory, and the generated source is an archetype, and that's like the skeleton of the project. The next step is to append some extra files filters for whatever subdirectories you have. So I expect to have a schemas directory underneath resources, an examples directory under resources, and data weave under resources. So these are the directories that I want to make sure aren't removed. And then you tend to install it into your local repository. So that's why I meant that if I was just doing a Maven archetype for myself, then I'd probably create it this way, add these extra filtered resources into the archetype that's generated, install it to my own local repository, and then whenever I need to create a project, just run this generate from archetype command and feed it the local archetype information to generate the project. And then I'd have to import it into my studio. But as Ryan says, doing it this way allows you to have more customization and better values. The template was just, it answers my main requirement, which was sharing something amongst my other developers, as well as scaffolding the initial project.
It's more powerful, but it's less easy to use for everybody, not just for you, right? The archetype is a little bit less easy to make, but also for me, if I'm your developer, it's a little less easy for me to go use it too, right?
That's right. So
I gotta use the command line to make a new project instead of the nice new project from template thing.
that's right. So I shared those two links in the chat. And yeah, that is how I create a project quickly. And more importantly, as I touched on, things like it's got pre-encrypted values. So if I want to submit, initialize the Git repository and put this into GitHub, and then share it to another developer and say, hey, you do the implementation flows, I'm not sharing unencrypted values directly into the GitHub repository, which is another gotcha to watch out for. The amount of people that have done a skeleton project and then foolishly put those values straight into a GitHub repository is quite large. The other things, it's not just the visible things that get saved. There are some not so visible things. So things like the git ignore file. I have a standardized git ignore file, and that's also part of this project template. So I've already pre-done the git ignore. That looks like, just for people's visibility, if I go into my implementation, so that project that I just created, the new project, this is my git ignore, and that's what my git ignore looks like. So my years of experience have found that I really ought to not save those into the Git repository. These are the Eclipse settings that I've learned to not have, because obviously Studio is based on Eclipse. And then these are things that are specific to MuleSoft projects that I don't want to necessarily be putting into GitHub. And this is my unencrypted values that I don't want putting into the GitHub. So a predefined git ignore is also part of that project template or Maven archetype. So that's useful to remember as too. And then we touch on as well things like the Mule artifact. So if we want to have a list of runtime properties that are going to be masked when you deploy it, I've got a common list of things that need to be secured for typical projects that are put into CloudHub. So yeah, and even things like standard rebeat files and a home.md in the Exchange documents. So yeah.
So is there any, you guys are all watching this, anybody have any standards that you like to put in that you think you've seen? I mean, Francis was real generous showing him all of his standards he's come up with. What belongs in a template?
Well, first of all, I love the discussion so far, because what I've been using is the archetype, the Maven, to create. So we have one created by our implementation partner, which was a MuleSoft solution architect, and it included a default health check, error handling, because this template, he built the templates to be, this is what you're going to use to start a REST API, if that's what you're building. And then we had like application standards when it's just going to be a Mule app, not necessarily a REST API, and different. So that's how he kind of divvied them up. But so the error handling, we had a default error handler. We did have the CI/CD stuff, which is how I became aware of it. So I'm really interested in the template versus the Maven archetype, because it took me a minute to really understand it, because we needed to update the pipeline files. And so it was a little bit of a struggle. I was like, wait, what is this? So I feel like the template might have been a little bit easier, but I did figure it out and decided to keep it because well, mainly I guess I didn't realize this whole thing that we just saw would be do the same thing like you were saying. But so then I am gonna take a look at those links to see, okay, now that I'm in a new place, am I going to set it up the same way, or would I go this template route because it's going to be a little bit maybe easier to implement or share with other people?
Yeah, I'd be tempted just to start the skeleton Maven archetype from the archetype, import that, and then publish that as a template without any changes.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, when it comes to the pipelines, that's an area where this whole question of do I use a template or do I find a way to make a dependency, is it, once you generate something from a template, like whatever version of the template you used is kind of final. It's like, something I did 6 months ago with my template 6 months ago, like anything I add to the template now isn't going to be there, you know?
That's right.
So we do have
That's
this
the reason why you need to start soon. You need to start early. As you saw with my template, I didn't have a global error handler, but I do have one. I didn't have the custom logger in there, but I do have one. But these are the things I'm going to iterate forward to in the next days. But luckily, I haven't put too much in production. But like I say, I do the code reviews, but I'm just going to use all my code review experience plus the common error handler, the common logger, and the common custom logger components. So I'm going to build this Maven archetype. Well, I'm going to build this project template out a bit more.
Something that makes me have a question about what are you guys doing in terms of repository organization? And what I mean by that is I had a little discussion in the MuleSoft community Slack a while ago, and it seems like most companies are using a single repository per project, and that's what I'm used to doing as well. But there are those companies out there that have a big monorepo, or at least a big repo that has multiple Mule projects inside it. Is anybody doing that, or do you have any opinions one way or the other?
I've done both. And it was the DevOps manager who pushed for the single repository because he was used to things like Salesforce being stored in the single repository. But the downside, I would say, of a single repository is that you need your assets up front. So it depends how your business is driving you. We just divested a business. I started a new team, and I was told get some integrations up and running just to template and demonstrate stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can do that, but what about all my common stuff that I want? Do I get to build the common stuff first, or do you just expect to magic it up? And that was really the driver to have separate repositories, because is it chicken and egg? I suppose is the best way of describing it. I would say that if you're going to have a mono repository, you need to be building out your custom assets first, and then any reusable code, and then applying that to an actual implementation that pulls all that reusable code together, because then it makes sense to have the mono repository.
Just to add to that,
please go.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that, you want to make sure that nothing gets broken. So that's a conversation that, like Francis was saying, that you have to talk to with the DevOps people, and depending on your pipeline, because how you would set something up in Jenkins might be a little bit different with Azure. And you just need to make sure that nothing gets broken.
That's right, and you need your naming conventions as well. You need your standards. You saw on the Mule artifact JSON that I had a anypoint secret for the platforms for accessing your policies and to log into the API manager. What convention do you have for the naming of your properties and the structure of your properties? You could, unless you've defined all those, you're going to be going back and correcting your build YAMLs on you.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that MuleSoft has set up the C4E, is to have these discussions ahead of time and these standards, and get the right people involved. Sometimes I see like organizations don't have that in place, but if you have a C4E, or maybe you might call it a COE, that should definitely be in place.
Yeah, I think one of the ramifications there is that a lot of times they're asking people for these standards. I'm just thinking of a sort of a current project where they're saying, whoa, what do you want to call your environment, or this, that, or the other thing? And then but there's no context. So they don't understand why they're picking this naming convention when they are. And then now down the road, we're thinking, well, we want that to match the other environments. We don't want to be pointing, QA at a different named UAT or something like that. So I think so part of that too is getting the right people, involved in those discussions. And a lot of times they're little bit higher up when doing that. And then you get it as the technical implementer and you're like, I'm not sure that that's what we really want. So, and then it's kind of hard to change things, I think, is the other thing too, down the road.
You know, that's one reason I asked about the repo thing. I've always done micro repos, and one thing that seems to appeal to me about a mono repo that I might want to try someday is, let's say I need to go across all my projects and rename the test environment to QA. I can do a single pull request that goes across 35 projects, you know, or if I wanted to do something like change my Azure pipeline to have an additional build stage, right? I can add that to all the Azure pipelines YAML files in one commit. So I've
But
never
you wanna
been in an environment
download
like
a
that,
big
but that
mono-
sounds appealing, you know?
My question is, do you want to download a big mono repo? Do you have to download it all? Because let's say you have like 500 microservices. Do you have to download it all, or can you pull in sub repos of mono repos? I mean,
That's a good question. Go ahead.
I've had the mono repo, and it's hard to pull in sub bits. You can go down the branch, but yeah, I find it hard. That's more to do with workspace. You still end up pulling the whole repo. Even if you workspace just part of the repo, you still end up downloading it all. And then if you have some idiots that have joined in that like to save their jar files in the target directory and not have the right git ignores, yeah, that mono repo gets unwieldy real quick. So
Somehow Google and Facebook have done it. They have mono repos.
do you think they fire people that like do it wrong?
I don't know what they do, but somehow there's an enormous amount of code in those repos, and they must not clone the entire thing to their laptop.
Well, don't be so
That-
sure. I've worked in some companies that did database schemas, and they had big mono repos. They still claimed the whole thing to their local machines. It depends how good you are at keeping your code base clean and not having jar files, not having pictures and documents and stuff like
so I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So Francis, are you an integration architect?
that. No, I'm just a developer.
You're a developer, okay. Are you like a lead?
I am qualified as an integration architect.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking this, because a lot of times you'll have the integration architect or the lead, maybe a senior person. How do you make sure when you're on a project that this stuff is in place, or taking a lead and doing these types of things, right? Because sometimes you might get on a project as a developer and you say, well, I know this should be done, but I'm just gonna do my job and then I'm gonna get out. So how do you say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna set up,
The magic word is
these pipelines. I'm gonna set up a template, or I'm gonna do it this way because this is the best practice versus just, I'm just gonna do my job, set up the integration and get out the door.
yeah, the magic word is ownership. I actually am the platform administrator. So it's a good job I'm a platform architect as well as an integration architect, because I've got the keys. And when you've got the keys, you also have, with great power, you have great responsibilities. So you want to keep it clean, you want to keep it organized, you want your naming conventions. So I'm also in charge of the coding standards. But that was the reason why I sort of touched on the chicken and egg scenario, because I'm part of the DevOps team and they wanted DevOps pipeline setting up first. And I'm like, well, what about Maven archetypes and naming conventions? Surely I should get those set up first because they're the dependencies. And what about all my Mule plugins and my policies, my reusable code? Can I get those set up first too, rather than like trying to fork something from another project and extrapolate the code? So it comes down to that ownership and who's going to look after it in operations. So within my team, I'm the only company employee, but my whole team's offshore and an outsourced contractor. So it is a bit like herding cats. I do need to convince them to do code review and to convince them to apply coding standards. So I do involve them in things like the coding standards documents, and I do take them through sessions where I work with them and show them what I do. But then I also have to demonstrate good behavior by showing them how to create project templates and how to create good pipelines. So while they're learning, while they're growing, they're more keen to follow some of my conventions. So ownership's what starts it, followed by responsibility and operations that feed those standardization requirements.
Thank you.
I was expecting 5 people to raise their hand or speak up there. I was I'm still, so is that, anybody have any ideas about that or follow-ups?
I mean, I definitely agree. I've never had the architect role. Well, maybe I have, and I just didn't realize it. But I was, title-wise, I was more lead. But I would agree with everything you said, like ownership. You know, I've been in a situation where I'm a partner. I'm a partner, and we're coming in for a big we're coming in for our first like bid, and we want it. So we want it. And so because this is our first bid at this customer, it's a lower bid, but we're hoping that we set this up right so that we'll take a maintenance of it. So you get in these projects, you want to do it right so that, especially if you're a partner, you'll be able to get the maintenance contract. And so if you're maintaining what you did, you really want to make sure that you didn't put together, I want to say it in a politically correct way. You didn't deliver crap, because you're going to be maintaining your crap. So I think, like you said, ownership is extremely important. Even if you're not maintaining it, trying to do it the right way, trying to follow the best practices, because somebody has to maintain it.
That's right, because some of those sort of standards could even be specific to your own usage. Another thing that I did this week was customize a rule set, a governance rule set. If anyone's applied RAML governance rules to their APIs, and I had to teach my developers that, because quite a lot of the time they didn't have permissions on the platform to even see API governance, which obviously only got introduced about 1.5 years ago. So unless you've got a proactive person applying the extra permissions, some people didn't even realize there was such a thing as API governance. But I've applied the 5 standard RAML rules. There's a 6th one that came out 2 weeks ago. And the first thing I saw that got broken was one of the violations was that all attributes in JSON payloads had to be camel case. Now, some of my APIs are snake case, kebab case. You can't enforce camel case. Some people don't like camel case attributes being camel case URIs or camel case query parameters. So that was the first rule within the Anypoint platform basic best practice for APIs. It enforced camel case and wouldn't let you publish the API unless they were camel case. So I downloaded the rule set, moved the violation down to a warning, and then republished it to Exchange. So that's the start of my customization of the rule set. But then I'm going to add to that rule set. I'm going to think of other things that are more useful. We have a number of reusable policies that can be applied for security, that can be applied for transforming the payload. For example, one of my policies that I've done recently takes the response payload and will reformat it into title case or kebab case or snake case. So I can proxy an API and then just transform the payload attributes, or I can mask the payload values. I can look for keywords like password and client secret and mask those values. That's another policy that I've created. But those policies influence my best practice on API governance. So I'm going to add some of those rules. If for the payload attributes, for example, I'm going to say it has to be either kebab case, snake case, title case, or camel case, but it can't be a mixed match or not conforming to that.
So you put together there's some developer and there's some platform architect, and there's a lot mixed into what you just said.
There
I
is.
don't know that does everybody here know about API governance? That it's a platform thing? So I don't know if they know that, Francis.
Yeah, I never used it, but I know when it came out. Have you used any of the security rule sets?
Yeah, they're pretty easy to apply. They don't usually break your code. Things like HTTPS, for example, just looks to see that in the protocol section of the root part of the RAML spec, it has HTTPS as a protocol. And then in your base URI, it makes sure that it starts with HTTPS. So that's a really, really easy governance rule that you can apply. If you're missing a base URI, because some people forget to put a base URI in their RAML template, then it's going to fail that governance rule. But it's only looking for 2 fixes or 2 things. The other rules are things like OWASP. That tends to look for rate limiting. So it's good to have a RAML fragment for rate limiting to apply within your RAML specification, because then you conform to that rule. That's how I did it. I started writing RAML specs for my current role about 9 months ago, and I just applied all 5 rules and saw what I needed to do as a minimum to get it through the 5 rules. I have been writing RAML for longer than that.
Is it only enforcing at the design level?
Yes,
not
they're enforced in
during
Design Center, and you can't press publish unless they conform to those governance rules.
Okay.
So you can take a bad one, as in one that somebody's whipped up, and apply the governance rules, and you just won't be able to iterate it forward until they fix it.
Nice.
But as you know, some of the fix might be things like, say your payload attributes are not camel cased. Well, if you apply the Anypoint best practice governance rule, you're going to break that. But if you change that in the RAML spec, you're going to need a change in the implementation. Which is why I then did a policy which changed it for me.
There's a project that I think got abandoned called MuleLint. A friend of mine started an open source project. Because if you want to do governance over the code itself, what are your options? You can use a pull request, but there's no, like, in JavaScript world, you have a thing called a linter. And in Java world, you have a thing called check style. And you have these tools that could be part of your build that check if your loggers all have categories, or if your flows have names that are camel case. You might want to check those things too, right? So he made a little project that would do that with the XML, and I don't think anybody ever adopted it, and it kind of got ignored, and so he stopped working on it. So I don't know if does anybody know about something that's maybe better than, like, because he was just like a one guy open source project.
Yes, I do indeed.
Oh.
I followed that. The MuleLint came out about 7 years ago. Manik Maniga has done a custom asset available at Avio. So if you go to Avio Consulting and have a look at their shared assets, they actually share a linting type tool with a few more rules. It's written in Groovy script, so how it's going to pan out in the future is anyone's guess. But there is a company called Integral Zone, which have done an Anypoint Studio plugin, and they've recently announced that they've done a VS Code plugin, and that plugin looks at your XML code and applies 180 rules to it. Now, I suspect some of those rules come from the API governance rules, but then quite a lot are new. They were a company that came out about 4 years ago. I think with some ex-MuleSoft employees. They went to a few MuleSoft meetups promoting their plugin. The whole idea was it's supposed to do code review for you and speed up a decentralized building of APIs, and then apply these rules afterwards. Because a lot of people find that things like Sonar Cloud and Sonar linting rules were hard to do because people had on-premise plugins but didn't have cloud plugins and all that sort of thing. So it is quite a good tool. There is a licensing cost, but they recently had a LinkedIn post saying the first 100 people that reply can get a limited time license just to try it out. Do you want me to?
On the MuleSoft Catalyst GitHub, there's Sonar Cube for Mule projects.
I think it only works.
You can do, I guess, a static code analysis for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the chat, I have just posted the LinkedIn post from that company, Integral Zone. There you go. But yeah, they're pretty quick off the mark if they manage to get a Visual Studio Code plugin installed. It's only at pre-release stage because I opened up Visual Studio Code and downloaded it today, but I haven't used it myself yet either.
I'm going to be one of those first 100.
Yeah, I'll beat you to it. I've sent an email off already.
So has anybody used Sonar Cube?
A few people, but it depends on your build pipeline, whether it's on premise or what backend assets it has access to.
I used a lot of Sonar Cube in my Java life, but not in anything in my Mule life. So this, it's very good at very popular languages, but Mule is not the, I mean, maybe that, I haven't, has anybody used that plugin that Whitney linked?
I don't know. It's from the Catalyst, and I think MuleSoft owns that MuleSoft Catalyst thing. And that's another thing to point out. I'm not sure how many people have access to it, but the MuleSoft Catalyst GitHub will have a lot of these like built-in architecture like features that you can give your team. But I think partners definitely get access, but I'm not sure about customers. But yeah, you can get dashboards, you can get that Sonar Cube plugin, and you can hook that into your pipeline and do like Surefire reports.
I have looked at
I
that,
might try it out.
and I've gone and robbed the rule set for that Sonar Cube. I think there's 41 rules, so it's not quite the same as the 180 rules of Integral Zone. But I was interested in what the rules were. Some of the rules were a bit noddy, like one of the rules was you shouldn't have more than 5 flows. And I'm like, 5 flows? I mean, I know each time you have a flow, it opens the thread and you have a certain number of threads depending on like what size vCore you use. But yeah, I can't imagine myself writing many implementations that have 5 or less flows.
I wonder if that's in a certification for MuleSoft Catalyst cert.
I haven't done, or have I? I've had a go at the MuleSoft Catalyst certification, and no, it's not. And I didn't pass it. I've got to have another go after I've actually done the training material.
I just missed that. What's the 5 flow limit?
Well, there's no limit. What it is if you get the Sonar Cube rules, so that Sonar Cube rule set that she's talking about, you can download the rule set and just look at it in XML and figure out what rules they apply, and then you can have handwritten coding standards if necessary if you don't want to automate the checks. But one of the checks was have less than 5 flows, and I thought, no way.
No, right. That's it.
So,
but you can configure that to say
you can up it to 10 or whatever, and then you just have to start thinking, if this is a 0.1 core, if this is a 1 core, just how many threads are going to be started up, because you always have a thread for each flow.
No, you don't. It doesn't do that, but it doesn't use a thread per flow. It's more of a maintainability thing for me. But I think more than, like, if I could tell it how many in a single file, I'd be happy. Like 10 or 12 or 15 is probably too many flows for one file. But I don't care how many are in the whole app. I mean, probably I don't want 100 of them. Right.
Yeah. Well, like you say, it's configurable, but I was just interested in what were the rules, because it's one thing to have these plugins, but I was more interested in the evolution of the rules, because like I say, Integral Zone have done quite a lot of work, and they seem to have cobbled together 180 rules, and that's from working with different customers and combining like a central view of all the rules that people apply, whereas that Sonar Lint rule set was just something that one person did 4 years ago.
I'll probably try that out. Complexity. Oh, it is per file.
Yeah, that was from the Sonar Cube documentation, the check.
I'd love to have a complexity measure per flow too. I have seen some monsters. I don't know if you guys have
I've seen some bad ones because of just not picking the right components, right? And it's like writing a whole stream of if and else's when you could have just chose a different components.
Yeah.
And some people tend to like that more. I have a question then about that, because my argument to them was that it would actually use more memory. But I don't know if that's true as I'm thinking about it now, because in my mind, I was thinking that every component, so like, I guess what I'm trying to say is every time they drug a choice over, that that's going to be put into memory when it starts. And so I felt like they just kept on doing a choice all the way instead of just making a better elimination, through one.
You can actually
Does that
you
make
can
sense?
do those choices in DataWeave, and if you do those choices in DataWeave, well, then it definitely is loaded into memory. But if you make your DataWeave reusable, it's just the ones.
So I don't know, is that yeah, I think when I think of complexity problems, I don't like the nested choice mess because of difficulty understanding the code. I don't believe there's any performance penalty because there are a bunch of little reactive functions that get chained together anyway, but they would be really hard to figure out what it does looking at the code, right? You open up the code 6 months later, you ever been mad at yourself?
Yeah.
You
No, I was mad at him for changing my code.
Yeah.
And then it scrolled across the screen. I mean, it was just that, yeah. And I was like, oh, why?
There's a question for about threading on the choice router. The choice router and the DataWeave component. In the Uber thread pool, the DataWeave is CPU intensive. The choice router, I can't remember off my head which one it is. I'm going to say CPU light thread at a guess.
It's going to be light at the outside, but every time it evaluates one of those win expressions, it's going back to CPU. Every time you run into DataWeave anywhere, that little chunk is going to be CPU intensive.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I was tempted to not use the choice router ever again and just have it in DataWeave and then just do my functional programming in DataWeave.
Well, you can for transformations. And the last thing I don't want to hear you do is do a DataWeave choice and then do a lookup inside. Like, please don't do that.
You can't do that anymore because lookup has been deprecated from 4.5, Mule 4.5.
I'm so happy.
Because it causes side effects.
Yeah,
Sorry.
lookup's bad.
That was drained into my existence at MuleSoft. Is like lookup will cause a side effect dependency.
So you need the choice router if you're going to do different stuff on each route, right? If you're like, it's not just a trend, you're going to go do some completely different thing, right? So you want the side effects, so you use a choice router, right? Right, Whitney? So like the whole reason we hated lookup is it's like a way out. It's like a escape hatch out of DataWeave back into the wild world of Mule.
And you have to remember, DataWeave's functional programming, and functional programming is not supposed to have side effects. So this is like, this is a go around because
it's not supposed to, but I'm really happy about the log function side effect, right? I'm glad it has that side effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're deep in the middle of a DataWeave function and you want to see what that one little field is. It's nice to have I'll just add a log statement real quick right there, right? Yeah. But most of the bad things in DataWeave are side effects. Like, you guys know the wait function? DW runtime wait is like the worst side effect. It like on purpose makes your code lock up.
So have we covered everything yet?
Have we what?
Have we covered everything yet?
Everything in the Mule world. No, I don't think so. I hope we're just rambling. You know, we have a whole lot of people here. If you guys want to keep us on track and ask more questions, we will do that. But you just keep letting us ramble, we'll ramble.
I have a question. I want to know how many different platforms, I'm going to say integration platforms, do people have experience with, right? Are you just Mule, or do you have experience with Boomi? What's the other ones? There's a whole bunch. Jitterbit, Synantic. What do you have?
This question was actually asked by MuleSoft, wasn't it, on some type forum of all the people in the
really?
Slack group. Yeah, they were just asking out there, does anyone have experience? I haven't seen the result of it yet, but I personally don't. I mean, MuleSoft is just so time consuming for me, or more to the point, leading a team is more time consuming for me than getting.
Have you done any migrations off of something to MuleSoft?
So before MuleSoft, I did BizTalk, Informatica, and even wrote internal kind of a Move It. That's like a file-based integration, and then also wrote like custom integration tools. And when I learned MuleSoft, I was like, why did I waste my time doing everything else?
Yeah, my usage of MuleSoft was driven by getting rid of other integrations. That was the justification for having MuleSoft.
Right. In healthcare is a lot of SSIS. So I don't know if that counts. You didn't mention it, but it's an integration, tool that
I had SSIS. The company I did work for, with the bit that was divested, we had everything that you've just described, but it wasn't necessarily owned by me. But my job was to replace it where possible with MuleSoft integrations. So all I did was look at their code or look at the requirements and then just redo it in MuleSoft.
Yeah, and that's kind of a trend now in the healthcare space for sure.
I'm in the
I've
middle
done
of
a lot
reviewing the
of
video.
migrations. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go Winnie.
I was going to say I've done a lot of migrations on MuleSoft, so off of something else. Especially when I started in Mule 3. The first migration I did was WebLogic, WebLogic. It's called WebLogic. No, that's I can't remember. Web Methods. Sorry. I am confusing servers with stuff, but Web Methods, and then TIPCO, on to Mule 3, and then there was Mule 3 to Mule 4 I did. Yeah, but if you stay in the integration space long enough, you will be moving off and on to different platforms. So, do you want to learn something new?
Just for IntegrationQuest's education stuff, I've started doing explorations into different API management and different integration platforms. And what first thing I noticed, I'm trying to do modern ones. So I'm looking at SnapLogic and I'm looking at Jitterbit and I'm looking at Google has an integration thing. Like they have Apogee, but then they have this other integration thing. Azure has Logic Apps and Azure API management. So I've been shopping to try to do good integrations in those things. And what I'm first finding out is that MuleSoft's whole picture isn't in any other products. You can't, there aren't anything else, as far as I can tell, that has API authoring and like what Exchange does, and then API management and integration development all in one process. You have to look, like when I got into the Azure world, they have an API manager. It kind of makes this developer portal that's nice. I mean, the Azure API manager developer portal is beautiful, right? Compared to like any point Exchange, but the authoring experience is terrible. It's not even there. You have to go make it out of other products. And I tried Kong, and Kong's API management's okay. It's pretty good, but there's like nothing there about an API catalog. So I'm finding that as I go try to use these other integration platforms, that the whole way that you do integration with MuleSoft is you have to piece it together. It's not that they can't do it, it's that you have to go buy 3 or 4 different vendor products and figure out how to fit them together. I don't know if anybody disagrees with me or if I haven't found the right product yet.
No, I do the same thing. My company's using Azure Data Lake to try and clean data, and its initial requirement is reporting. So it's not looking at real time, it's just looking at data flows that clean data, apply business rules, and then get it in a clean format to do reporting out of. But there's still, the consequence of that is that it can be provided as APIs for master data. And that's where MuleSoft might have to integrate with it and take the master data and synchronize it with Salesforce, that sort of thing. So I might use Azure APIs, but because the main aim of them is to clean the data and present it in report form, we're waiting on them to even begin the API work.
Does it seem like Postman is trying to migrate towards something like that? Because they keep coming out with new things there.
I tried the Postman. I bought a subscription for a month. Same thing with Kong and Insomnia. I tried both of those because I was interested in the API led side, and I actually did a video for Alex on the Twitch stream where I showed her what I ended up with trying to use Postman and .NET. It was messy. It was so, but Postman, I mean, I'm not gonna say that maybe they have the right idea. Like they are coming up with something sort of like Anypoint Exchange. They have something sort of like API, like Design Center. So at least on that side, sure. I don't think Audrey, I don't think they're even going to try to do something like Mule applications, like the actual integration code.
Right.
But,
Yeah. I was just curious because I do see, the governance and stuff, they're kind of evolving in certain areas. So.
I might, and I'd really like to hear if somebody tells me, hey, I'm missing something, because, MuleSoft, the way we do integration with MuleSoft is awesome. And the fact that we use MuleSoft's tools is okay. And I don't mind finding out that there's other tools that do that. That'd be cool, but I haven't found any.
No, that's one reason why I'm working as a MuleSoft developer, just because I like the platform for sure. So
I think that's the whole point of MuleSoft, it's about unified. So when they came up with this whole idea of unified API management, most of the components already existed. But having that unified platform from all the way from design, governance to design down to deployment and maintenance is what makes MuleSoft. It's the secret sauce. But I definitely think getting out there and exploring other products would be an advantage. I'm just going to say that out here, since
I would agree with you, because sometimes the business case come back and says, hey, MuleSoft's expensive.
yes,
I am super good at not having too many vCores, utilizing everything, producing the reusable assets in policies. So, and I focused on that because I knew that if I didn't show an ecosystem that they could pull things quickly together with, that people would say, hey, what value is it giving? Because a lot of people see MuleSoft, like you described, as the enterprise service bus, as the orchestration tool, rather than as all the other bits.
yeah. And I was talking to an architect last week, and he says his pitch now is, I can get you off MuleSoft because the customers are saying it's very expensive. So, if you can learn another platform to go with your MuleSoft experience, I think that would be really good.
Yeah, my experience is that it's expensive when people don't utilize it correctly, when they don't update their on-premise JDKs and it becomes unsupportable, or when they don't have the reusable components, or when they don't apply the API governance and they don't have coding standards, or they just have too many vCores and they just don't think about threading and particularly the reuse. It's surprising how many people build quite brittle connections.
Yeah,
because they don't have that domain design being someone central.
I'm a homeowner, and I bought a new main panel for my house a few months ago, which was super expensive. Right? I had to hire an electrician, and my house had to be turned off all day long. And my kids don't know why I spent $3,000 on that. Right? They don't. They're like if they're like, should we go get a new PlayStation, or should we buy a new main panel for our electrical box? They're going to pick the PlayStation. And the business is like that too. Like, wow, that electrical box is so expensive, right? But not having it is more expensive.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so if you're going to say MuleSoft is expensive, I've been in this conversation with so many people for 15 years because I just keep picking MuleSoft myself because it's the cheapest way to do this. Now, the question is whether you think doing this is a good idea. Because if you want to do this by rolling your own tools, you're going to pay 2 or 3 software developers to write 1/4 of it, and it's going to take them 18 months to build that. And they're going to go buy this product, and that one's not that good. And then they're going to replace part of it with open source, and that's not going to be that good. So you're going to wait 1.5 years to save 25% off of your bill, and you're going to spend it all in labor, and you're going to end up with a custom thing that you built yourself. Which maybe your guys are that good. It could be that there's some companies on the earth that hired some software developers and wrote themselves something better than Mule for their own companies, right? I doubt that that's a very common thing, and it's a super risky business strategy.
But then they leave, and that's why.
And then they leave.
Yeah, and that's where the problem begins. It's cheaper in the long run because you're not having to try to sustain something like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and if you think of the license as a salary, try that, right? How many salaries are you paying to own MuleSoft? And MuleSoft can't quit. and leave your company. Well, they can raise your price, but so do employees, right?
Right.
Employees
Yeah,
need
and the
raises.
problem is they never do that analysis correctly in any place that, you know, they'll say it when they're trying to buy it, but then they can't show it once they've purchased it because they just because it's a hard thing to put into those, you know, metrics. But I mean, I could do it if they ask me, but nobody's asked me, so.
It's like insurance, or it's like my electrical panel. Like when it's time to go, I bought a electric car and I have a charger in my garage, and it's time to plug it in, they just do it. They plug the electric charger into the mains because I already spent money last year replacing my mains. It was a much cheaper project now, and it's easy to forget that this is why it's cheaper now. Is because we set up we've designed our infrastructure, the core of our company IT, out of something durable and maintainable, and it's got an API catalog, and you can find all of the APIs, and you know who edited, and there's version numbers on everything, and the API manager shows you what's running. It's once you're already there, it's easy to forget what you have. You take it for granted, right? But it's worth that money.
Yeah, some of the justification I can think of, when I first started with MuleSoft 7 years ago, they were replacing bash scripts, they were replacing point-to-point connections. There was all sorts of stuff that was being replaced by the MuleSoft integration. But one of the key points of MuleSoft was the standardized logging. We had an on-premise version of MuleSoft. We had a standard TCP output to Splunk. So we were able to get visibility of all those previously bash scripts and SFTPs and stuff that was written, and it all went through MuleSoft. A bit harder in Cloud Hub. There was actually a question on the Slack board, somebody saying, how do you do your appender and batch up log messages, because it was opening a thread for each message, I think, for the type of appender they had in Cloud Hub. So yeah, that just reminded me that on-premise does have its advantages with things like centralized login.
So
that could be one justification for keeping MuleSoft.
but you guys brought up a good point too, that I want to mention, right? So I've been a customer and a partner and a MuleSoft employee, so I've seen like the good, the bad, the ugly on all sides. And I will say this, as a customer, let's say we're a customer, we're getting MuleSoft. There's a lack of MuleSoft talent, right? So they come in and they bring in a MuleSoft partner. And most of the time they bring in multiple MuleSoft partners, and everybody is doing their own thing. And then they come back in and they get, you know, after a certain amount of years, they come back, MuleSoft says, we're going to raise the prices. How, let's say if you were going to that company and they were starting from ground up, how would you set it up so that they didn't get like, I don't know. I think that's the issue. I don't know how to put it, but the issue is these customers, they come in, they have a whole bunch of different partners helping them. Everybody's doing their own thing. The customer doesn't know what they're doing. And then they end up with 500 microservices.
I've got
building.
a similar sort of issue with my sorting out my Jira board and backlog. I'm becoming more of a manager than I am a developer for that reason. Because when you start having stakeholders getting together, some of the stakeholders, me wanting coding requirements, me wanting to have mono or single repositories. So I'm a stakeholder as well as a customer. But you can only justify things on business value. So I started looking, so who's not me and who can get business value? And at some point, I'd like to give all my MuleSoft applications and implementations off to some operations. And what sort of things do they need in operations? Well, if I've got a version 1 of an API and a version 2, they're going to need some sort of policy that does canary or green-blue deployment or circuit breaker or things like that. So I concentrate early on pulling those custom policies from the Catalyst and providing assets that were for operations. So I try to think of business value as being someone other than myself. And as soon as you get business value recognized by other people that aren't MuleSoft, well, then you've got more of a justification for keeping MuleSoft.
That's really it. Yeah. But the software industry, you know, all along is sensitive to this risk where the people who know how everything works build things so that they can take care of things, and then they hire people or they retire or they move to another company, and the people left behind have, what do they have? They have this kind of halfway, a system that works if you already know where all the buttons are and all the dials are, right? All the little pieces are. So building things so that other people can own them is way more valuable than building things so that you can own them, right?
Yeah.
And that's what MuleSoft is great at, making it possible for other people to own what I build.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm separating my user stories by each different stakeholder and what business value. So each user story is a business value for a specific customer. So then I can sell it when it comes to implementation and go live time. And crucially, hand it over.
Well, I do want to say, Francis, you have inspired me to come up with some videos.
Yeah.
I actually post them. I will give you a shout out on the videos. And I'm keeping it a secret from Ryan, so you won't know what video I make.
Well, my reason for contributing was because I was trying to pinch Diane and Ryan's help with VPN and setting that up.
I hope we helped. Did that
Yeah.
get sorted out?
Well, I'd love to see a working example of a VPN. You know, I'm being told by my infrastructure team, show me the VPN coming up. And I'm like, well, give me a high port number IP address that I can try and access. And yeah, which comes first, VPN or the transport?
Yeah, the IPsec, I can tell you from my last time doing it, the best visibility I had was on the other side, unfortunately, your network team side.
Yeah,
so
that's the problem I've got. I'm trying to convince the network team they need to be logging into something and showing me trying to bang down the door.
Yeah, they can see the tunnel. There's two layers. There's the tunnel coming up, and then there's the routes getting propagated, and then the tunnel's ready. And it sounds to me like you're not getting both.
No, I'm stuck at that stage. I need some service on the other side, on premise, that somebody owns, that somebody can see the logs, that somebody can tell me, am I banging the door? Am I trying to get in? Is it a firewall rule stopping me, or is it your port denied access list, local host file, whatever? You know,
Yeah.
What do I need?
Well, we'll be happy to keep pinching help. You're on we can do that offline. So I think we did get close to the end here, everybody. And Brittany, I never let you do slides. Do you need to do any slides this time, or are we just going to do verbal and say goodbye?
I think we can do a verbal. I mean, the slides are just pretty, but
yeah. I appreciate everybody being part of our community. This is how, I learned so much in my career by sharing war stories and rubbing elbows with people like you. And thank you for coming and being part of this.
yeah, I enjoyed myself too. Sorry. I enjoyed myself too, guys. Thank you. And I said, there's a lot of inspiration and ideas that were thrown out today. You guys should try to implement them at your own companies, or just bring up the suggestions to the ones in leadership, about archetypes and templates and the stuff that you've learned.
Policies and canary policies and custom assets that you can populate your exchange with.
Well, everybody, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Okay. See you later.